Hey friends, welcome to the Kids Ministry Circle podcast. Kids Ministry Circle is a community for kids ministry leaders to be encouraged and equipped to love and serve the local church. I'm your host, Lauren Jackson, and today's episode is with my friend, James Lott. James is the kids ministry director at Stonehill Church, and I first met James kind of throughout the kids ministry social media world, and then he jumped into one of our seasonal cohorts, and actually in the span of that cohort season, he left his current job, moved his family a few states away, and started a brand new job. And so I knew I wanted to have James join us on the podcast to talk about that big transition. I'm sure many of us have felt the confusion or the just feeling stuck on whether or not you should go or you should leave or you should try and get that different job or wherever, and just discernment and listening to the Holy Spirit and where He is leading us. All of that can sometimes feel really hard. And so I wanted to get James's perspective as he just recently did this. We talk about how him and his family discerned whether or not they were ready to transition jobs. And we talk about what he's doing in the first 90 days of his brand new job. So whether you're in the middle of a transition or thinking about a transition, or maybe you've never had to do a transition like this, I know that everyone is going to be encouraged by the way that James leads well and serves his community, not only the church he was previously at, but the church he is at right now. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to share about something coming to a city near you this fall. In 2023, you're asking new questions about what it means to lead your ministry. Like, what do we measure beyond attendance? How do we know if we're leading our ministries well? And are we handing the next generation a lasting, authentic kind of faith? These are the questions we're all asking because it seems like people aren't coming back to our buildings like they used to. And if they are, it still doesn't guarantee we're handing them a brighter faith and future. So, what if we could reframe for ourselves and our entire team what success looks like in 2023? This fall, Orange is bringing you a 1 day of live ministry training to a city near you so that you and your entire team can learn together. You'll learn what's new in culture, what's next developmentally for the kids and teenagers in your church, and you'll show your team what it looks like to keep faith alive. Orange Tour is coming to a city near you so you can bring your staff, volunteers, parents, any leader who cares about the faith and future of the next generation to a 1 day event guaranteed to spark ideas, collaboration, and innovation in your approach to ministry. For every ministry leader and ministry team looking to build a brighter future, a stronger team, a clear strategy for the year ahead. It's a 1 day packed with practical training, and it only comes around once a year. To find a location near you, go to orangetour.org. When you register, use code Kids Ministry Circle OT23 at checkout to get 10% off the ticket price. That's orangetour.org and use code Kids Ministry Circle OT23. We'll see you there. James, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Why don't you start off our conversation by sharing a little bit about yourself, talking about how you got into the world of kids ministry and where you currently serve?
Yeah, so I'm married to my wife, Kelly, and we have 3 little boys. And so our life is a little bit chaotic right now, but we're living in Meridian, Idaho. So it's a suburb of Boise. It's blowing up, lots and lots of young families. And so doing that together. And then I got started in kids ministry really back when I was in middle school. I didn't realize I was getting started in kids ministry. I started with a group called Child Evangelism Fellowship. And did a lot of work inside of the city of Memphis and had a camp there. And that's where the Lord really just started working on my heart for kids and for sharing the gospel with kids. And here we are over a decade later, and kids ministry is everything. So, yeah. That's
awesome. Okay, so remind us where you are currently on staff.
Yeah, so I'm repping it right now. Stonehill Church in Meridian, Idaho. We are a church plant planted back in 2016, and so we're mobile right now. I'm getting my first little taste of setup, tear down every single week. That's where we are. Stonehill Church.
Nice. That's awesome. So the reason why I wanted you to jump on the podcast is we met because you are part of the Kids Ministry Circle Spring cohort, and
Oh, yeah.
that's where we kind of met for the first time, other than just kind of engaging on social media here and there. But within that time of you being in the spring cohort, you got a new job. You transitioned from one job to another. You moved your family across the United States. Like, it was a big deal. And so I would love to kind of chat with you about what that looked like. What was your process like? Leaving a church is hard, and you were so good about reminding us in the spring cohort of, like, sometimes you just move jobs. Like, this wasn't a bad thing. There was no negative reason for you leaving. You just kind of transitioned. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about what that, like, overarching of this transition, kind of share a little bit about maybe why you transitioned jobs, what brought on this kind of conversation, and then we'll kind of dig into the weeds, but give us like the overarching big transition that you just walked through.
Yeah. Well, first I would say I think it's a beautiful thing. I don't take for granted the fact that I was able to leave a healthy church in a healthy way.
Yep.
That is just so hard to find. So, and I'm still texting back and forth with staff and people and Zooms and FaceTimes and things with folks back at our last church. But which is just, it's so, I never want to take that for granted. It really is a beautiful thing to be able to have that sort of good transition. So, my wife and I lived out here in the Boise area before, shortly after we got married, and left here and moved back to Memphis, where we're originally from. And so we really had fallen in love with the West, really fallen in love with Idaho. There's just a lot of things that tie us to being here. If I can dare go into it a little bit, we lost our firstborn son when he was about 4 months old, and so he's buried actually out here in a family cemetery. And so we kind of known we always wanted to come back out this way, but we're just kind of waiting on it to be the right fit. From Boise's blowing up. It's a crazy environment out this way, of just families rushing in from California and Oregon and Washington. There's a lot of folks coming in, and so I've just had a heart for these families that are coming in, saying, like, we got to do something to reach these people. And so I was serious about wanting to find a church here that was serious about making disciples, and I felt like that was the case with Stonehill. And so transition wise, we kind of thought we were going to be at our previous spot a little bit longer than we were. And, this position came up, and we just felt like the Lord gave us the thumbs up to go and apply, and just said, all right, Lord, if this is what you have for us, open the door and make it incredibly obvious. And as the Lord does, he does. And so from submitting resume to sign contract was 18 days. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So in kids ministry world, that doesn't happen in any world.
That's
basically.
crazy.
So the Lord obviously had his hand on it. He really did in that transition. And so, that's a little bit of a story for it.
That's awesome.
It's been a blessing to be a part of a church that's serious about making disciples and serious about reaching the community too. Because sometimes you get folks that are on either end of the spectrum, and to find some church that's in the middle ground is a sweet spot to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do know that Idaho is blowing up like crazy. I've got some friends who live there and love it. And like, that's so exciting to be in a place of growth. And as someone who grew up in Southern California, there are a lot of people moving out of California and trying to find more space and more outdoorsy things. And so that's so exciting to be in such a fun part of the United States right now. But I want to kind of go into a little bit more of the details, because I feel like this is a common experience for whether it's leaders in the church or kids ministry leaders, or really just anybody in general, of this feeling called to leave your job, trying to figure out, how do you find a new job? How do you balance like wanting to be somewhere else, but you're still in one spot, and just that tension of trying to find a new job, but also trying to do a really great job at the job that you currently have. And so kind of talking about, what did your prayer life look in this season? Like, what were you and your wife praying for? Talk to me from like the moment you saw this job opening. Where did you find this job opening? Kind of like go into a little bit of those details.
Yeah, so found the job opening on church staffing, which is always
Okay.
pretty much a good like go-to starting
Yep.
place. They'd had it posted for a little while, and so prayer life, I think for us was more than anything, kind of praying like, is this something you have for us? Like, is this a step that we can take? Because I think we had kind of we'd fallen in love with being out. If I can just go completely personal here, I'm just gonna dig into it. We'd fallen in love with Idaho, and my heart has always been really drawn to wanting to be back here since my son is buried here. But I didn't want that to be like the only factor pushing us towards. Like I wanted the Lord to fully have His hand in it, and so I think a lot of my prayer life was like, all right, Lord, like if this is you, I want it to fully be you. And then for us as a family praying, it was just Lord, if this is what you have for us, make it obvious, make it obvious. And we saw that. I mean, even like with our kids, all throughout times, we would read God's word tonight, and each night, and we would pray together. And we were actually going through, if I have time for a short story, we were going through one night praying for everything, and just praying through the transition, and we were watching on the YouVersion app some of the Life Kids. They've got some stuff that might be a little bit older, but in one of the stories that it showed, it specifically had one of the characters that was moving away to go to a new place, and it was talking about how we can have trust that God's with us even when we're getting ready to go to a new place, even when we have fear. And Kelly and I are looking at each other going, we did not pick this devotional for that, So there's little bitty things that kind of popped up along the way. I feel like the Lord's given us confirmation. But, aside from those kind of things, I think also reaching out, I've got a really close group of friends that my wife and I do, two other ministry couples that we keep in close contact about everything. And so for me, I'm reaching out to these guys and I'm letting them know all the way along the process, more. Now, 18 days isn't a very long process, but even like the little bit of time before that we were praying through, just kind of asking them to join us in that, seeking wisdom from them. I'm for me personally, when I'm looking at making decisions in ministry, I'm looking at God's word, I'm praying and looking for confirmation from Him, and then I'm also seeking out godly counsel. And I think you have those triad of things, I think you'll be able to go pretty far. So,
yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I love how God has slowly but also quickly for your 18 days has like revealed a little bit of the plan to you as you have gone. And we're going to talk about this in a second, but you have 3 boys, and that's a big deal to move small children to a new place. And so we're going to get to that in a second, but I would love to know what happened next. You got this job, you applied, you started interviewing, and how did you communicate this well? And I think this is in the overarching scheme of leaving well. And so how did you communicate this? What did leaving the families and the kids a part of the ministry that you were leading and your fellow staff members, what did that look like? How were you able to steward your last couple weeks in this ministry well?
Yeah, so I guess I should maybe start some context here. So I had a church here that we left. That I felt like the transition went well. I think one of the things that I tried to do in leaving there is I tried to do things in such a way that I felt like what I was doing what was best for the ministry moving forward. And so that was kind of my push the entire time, was like, I'm going to do what I think is going to set the ministry up for the most success. Whether it was communication, whether it was going through and doing all sorts of things, all of the stuff that there is with that. And what I realized is, at the end of the day, the responsibility for that church does not fall on me. When that time comes, at the end of the day, the responsibility is going to fall on, the elders or the pastors in charge. And so I kind of changed my tune a little bit this time, in transition, and more went towards what can I do to best set up our pastors, those that my team below me, what can I do to help best set them up for success moving forward? Kind of realizing that the responsibility and for me, what sits so heavy in ministry is just the weight of the authority that you hold in ministry. I wanted to be willing to say, this is God's church, and this responsibility and authority is given over to these pastors and these elders, and I want to help set them up for success best I can. So I guess that was kind of one thing that was different. That's something that I really tried to focus on this last time around. But communicating, I mean, a lot of phone calls is kind of the way to do that. I think you also have to be wise in communicating. There's two facets to it. There's a communicating to your church body, and there's communicating, all of that public. But there's also that private side of things. And so, we kind of kept it really close to our chest that we were going to leave. And so kind of waited. We kind of known for a little while that we were going to leave. I really think it just depends on what you feel like is going to be best for your family. Because I think oftentimes, and what I found my first time leaving when I was young in ministry is I was thinking so much about the church and what I could do to set them up for success, what I could do to set them up for success moving forward, and kind of forgot that I need to remember my family in that whole time of transition, and that may change the communication timeline for people. So lots of phone calls, as many face-to-face conversations as you can have, but you're never really going to do it perfectly, but you do the best you can with what you're given. So
yeah, that's awesome. I loved how you specifically talked about setting up your team for success, setting up your fellow coworkers and the pastors and the staff, setting them up well for success, because ultimately, just like you said, this ministry is not ultimately yours, right? Like, as leaders, we kind of know that we are given the opportunity. God has given us this chance to love and serve the local church. And ultimately, the end game is not for you or I to be the ultimate leader of any ministry, right? We want to continue to lead up and train up volunteers to ultimately replace us. Yeah. And I would love how you are kind of some specific ways that you were able to transition things to, maybe it was some volunteers who were working interim while you were transitioning off staff and they were trying to find somebody else, or if there was already somebody who was like, oh no, this person would make an incredible director. Kind of talk us through that process.
Yeah, so I was very blessed to be part of a staff that was a pretty decent size. And so, as far as passing off responsibilities and setting people up for success, I got to spend a little bit more time going the staff route as opposed to working with volunteers. Yeah. Now, there are plenty of volunteers that I said, VBS is coming up, which they start VBS on Sunday. I'm like, VBS is coming up. Like, you got to jump in and serve. You got to jump in and serve. So I tried to do that as much as I could. But the majority of my responsibilities were passed on just across various members of the staff, and then particularly my admin and one of my coordinators that I had kind of took on a lot of my role and a lot of the things that I was doing. So kind of that high level vision for the ministry, running and planning events. And then your typical week-to-week curriculum editing, communication volunteers, all that kind of stuff. And so really what I tried to do is first started by making a list of the things that I was doing that really needed to be what I felt like really needed to be handled moving forward. And then going through those, sat down and walked through them with those two ladies that had kind of were there to help take over, and just said, how can I help you to do these things the very best? And so a lot of that was sitting down and having conversations about, for example, at that point I was writing our script for our large group time. And so I sat down with one of my coordinators who's, I'm sure, doing a fantastic job editing curriculum, and said, here's my thought process in doing this. Obviously, you don't have to do it this way, but here are the things that I do, and here's why I do this, and let's do one together. And then she did one. It's kind of that that whole model of, you show someone how to do it. Yep. You watch someone do it, they do it. That whole deal. Yep. So.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's oftentimes the hardest process of leaving any church is handing over the things that you have either started or are leading, and the things that you're like, okay, this is my little baby project, and now somebody else has to like take it over,
yeah.
and you're like, you can change it, but please don't. Like,
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where you feel really blessed when you do have a team like that. Like
yeah,
that whole transition, gosh, it's been such a blessing because like that team, I have a super high level of trust for that team. And I was lucky enough to be able to build that team. And so, I'm still texting folks back and forth. I'm like, how's it going?
yeah,
Because you always do want to have that extra bit. You're gonna have that little bit of care, but it's
yeah,
nice when you trust the people you're handing off to, and you're like, I know you guys are gonna crush it. I know you
totally.
guys are gonna crush it, and that's a good spot to be. Really is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we're going to jump back to the personal family side of transitioning. And oftentimes when you transition jobs, sometimes you're not physically moving, but a lot of times you are. And so I would love for you to kind of talk through what this mentality, and the truth of the matter is a job at a church is not just a job, right? This is like your entire community, and you're finding new friends, and you're joining new small groups, and your kids are involved. And when you work for a church, the church is your family, because that's what the church is. And so it's not just transitioning jobs. In a lot of ways, you're like what you said, of you're keeping a lot of friendships from your old job and your old church, but you want to fully be involved in your current community. And so what has that looked like? And maybe speak specifically to your kids and maybe your wife, of like, what does that look like for you to jump into a new community and try really hard to build friendships? I mean, we moved from Texas back to Colorado, and my husband was on staff and trying to find friends, but having young kids. And so what does that look like for your family to jump in and try and make new friends and just build new community?
Yeah, no kidding. It is tough with the kids. So my three boys are 5, 4, and 2, and so we're at that point where any point of the day could be complete chaos. So really, what we're looking for, right? Really, what we're looking for is environments and moments we can go with people that have kids of the same age. For whatever reason, at Stonehill, we have so many families here with 3 boys. Hilarious. So we basically like. All the families with 3 boys are like, we're going to go to the park. Let's go hang out. And so I think looking for those moments of things that you can do, to be intentional with the other family in a way that like, oh, this makes sense for all of us. Like, we're not going to go try to sit down and go eat, but many of those families have said like, hey, Saturday at 10, we're going to go to the park and just go hang out. It doesn't have to be anything super formal or official or anything. I think it's just building connection with those people in that kind of a way. We've also had some folks over to our house a little bit. There's still moving boxes everywhere. Those are things I like to do. Going over to people's house for dinner. Just spending some time together outside of church, which is really easy for us right now because we're a mobile environment, and so
Yep.
kind of forced to go outside of the church.
That's awesome. Has there ever, and you can share as much as you want to share, but has there been a moment that has been really hard for your boys, of a moment where it's like, man, I miss what we had. I miss our old church. How have you guys navigated that as parents?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that was one of the things I wanted to go into. So I think in the whole process of getting plugged into, one of the things that we've learned, because I'm one of these that I feel like if you're not... you can't go into something just thinking you have everything figured out. You have to be ready to learn. And so for us, we learned really quickly that our oldest son, his social battery, very, very small, like very, very small. So when we moved to our previous church, we got there like a little bit before COVID. And so it was really hard to get connected with families, because by the time the new guy phase was done, we were still in COVID. And so what I'm realizing is my son's social battery is really, really small. And so we had a weekend where we went like every single day. We were going over to friends' houses and seeing people. And he just said, like at the end of the day, he's like, I'm just ready to be home. I'm just ready to be home. And so I'm learning that kind of a thing, that there's for sure little things you kind of have to watch with him, realizing like, oh yeah, this is all super, super new to them. And so in that, my 2 younger ones are 2 and 4, and I think they're kind of at that point where they haven't reached out of like toddler stage. They're not fully into kid stage, I would say, yet, as if I know anything, because I have a 5-year-old and below. But our 5-year-old is definitely taking it really hard. So
Mm.
the other night, was having a really hard night. He just, you know, losing it as they do, bedtime, and eventually he ran downstairs to go get a glass of water, and I just picked him up. We sat on the floor of the kitchen, and I said, "Dude, how you doing?" And he
Yeah.
just started bawling, and he says,
Oh,
"Daddy,
sweet boy.
I don't like this new house. I want to go home." And so it's been really tough on that side of things. We've done transitions outside of having kids, and they seem to be a little bit easier. And so we're just trying to be as intentional with him as we can, looking for moments to actually have those conversations with him about where we used to live, looking for moments to, just have special moments with just him, as much as we can have those. And then being sensitive to like, hey, seems like this transition is really hard, and so running them ragged all weekend long probably isn't the wisest idea for our family.
Mm-hmm.
So it just takes the willingness to understand that, see that, and then just be very gracious to his own social battery.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for sharing. I know like that is probably going to speak to a lot of people who are
All
either
the parents
considering,
are just like,
yes,
oh no.
yes, but like those who are either considering a transition or have just walked through a transition, who feel this tension of like, I love my new job, I want to give all that I can to this, but also like I need to care for my family and my kids and help them navigate this transition as well. And so it's tricky, it's hard. And I think I can't remember where I kind of heard this mindset, but just this idea of like, how do you loop your kids into the way that God is teaching you? And just this idea of saying, hey, we're all in this transition, and God led us here to be here, and like inviting them into what God is teaching you guys as parents, but also like inviting them to listen to what maybe God is telling them, and like being able to open your eyes and notice the way that God is working in and through your kids, especially in a transition, is hard and crazy and wild and scary, but also like really beautiful to be able in 2, 3, 4 years look back and be able to acknowledge of like, wow, God is really faithful in this season. And so I appreciate you sharing not only the really great things about transitioning and leaving a job and getting into a new job, but also the really hard things, because I feel like it's both and that's just the way that life is sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely both and there are things that, I think I'm a very black and white person, so I just love when things are it's just that way, and it's not. I think, ministry is incredibly complex, and so we shouldn't be surprised that transitioning in ministry is incredibly complex.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, let's talk about your new job, because I definitely want to talk about what does it look like to enter into a new role. And you don't want to be that person who's constantly being like, well, at this church I did this, and in my previous job I did this. But you also have a lot of experience coming in, but also you want to be a longtime learner and continue to learn what their culture is doing and what their church is all about. So talk to us about what were like the first steps that you took in this new role. Like the first couple weeks, what were you focusing on?
Yeah, so I think learning culture is huge. For me, my previous church like had a very, very defined staff culture that I'd never been a part of a church like that before. And so coming into Stonehill, I immediately said, I want to do everything I can to latch on to culture here. What are the things that are important to Stonehill? What are the things that are important to our staff? What does that look like? It makes it really easy when you have a super fun staff. And so that's been a blessing. In my first couple of weeks, we actually got to go to the church leadership conference at Watermark. And so that's a really good way to get to know those staff that you've hung out with for like 2 weeks total, is to go on a week-long trip with them to Texas and show them what good barbecue is. So I'm even got my Buc-ee's hat I'm rocking right now.
I know. Such a Texas thing.
So good. So yeah, I think learning culture, as far as the way the staff works, I think a lot of listening. From me coming in, I try to spend time with my kids ministry staff specifically. Just
Mm-hmm.
figure out what are the things you guys are doing, what's working right now. Really looking for what are the things that what are the things that make them tick, and how can I celebrate them and what they're doing.
Yeah.
Finding out where their heart is and their passions, all of those kind of things, I think are really helpful, or hopefully will be helpful moving forward. And then just getting to know people as much as we can. Like I said earlier, like just going out of our way to meet families, going out of our way to, which you have to dig sometimes to do that. But, as you're like wrapping up one play date, it's like, do you know any other families that are kind of,
Yep.
So that's kind of the first little bit of time there is doing that. And then I think also, I'm a big picture guy as well, and so I feel like I often have to take my ideas and like shove them down a little bit, and not run off too far with that. So I think for me it's a lot of actively being patient, because I have lots of ideas of things, but I definitely want to make sure I'm honoring the people who have come before and the culture as well. Make sure that those things are kind of fitting in.
That's awesome. Okay, we're gonna take it one step further.
Okay.
So you've done the first couple weeks. You're getting to know the culture. What do you have planned for the first 90 days? Like, what's some things that you want to focus on, or like, how are you tackling those first couple months as a new leader?
Yeah. So right now, we're recording this podcast in June. I feel as though we are incredibly behind right now, because in my head I'm like, we should be talking about like Christmas right now.
Yes.
So I think looking ahead right now, a lot of where my brain's going, and this is maybe more privately than anything, I'm thinking about the fall. I'm thinking about kickoff into that. I'm thinking about like milestone moments for our families. How do we celebrate those sort of things? And just, we're at a spot right now where Stonehill hasn't had a kids director for quite some time. And so someone that can come in and kind of drive that family vision piece is huge. And so I'm thinking through like possibly doing a Bible presentation for our kids, and revamping and doing a child dedication class, and just kind of those high level things that are getting families thinking more outside of Sunday morning, more outside of we come to church, but more of a getting in the home. Because I really think that's where the most impact is going to be made in kids. We all have heard that 1,000 times, but that's one practical way to do that. And then I have had, so right now on my staff, I have 3 coordinators. One is full-time and 2 are part-time. One of those has actually just stepped off the staff. She's been kind of waiting for a couple months, been holding out. She's been really sweet. And so I'm stepping into that coordinator role. So rocking and rolling with all of the things that I haven't done for quite some time. So that's taking up a little bit of time. Between that and camp and a summer kids event, I feel like that's taking up the majority of my time as of right now. But when I get the free time to think, when I get the free time to kind of sit back and look for the future, I'm really thinking through just calendar for the next year. I've gotten a really good rhythm where going into the fall, I have because most churches I've been in have like a calendar. Their calendar starts in January, their budget starts in January. So I've gotten myself really decently in the routine of like, June comes around, we're already thinking through what's happening next year. My brain's already mentally there with budget, with everything. So
which that's probably a good thing to do as a new leader, is to kind of just those first 90 days, you're just kind of doing what was already planned and what was already in place. And then like just learning and listening on what happens on Sunday mornings and what's for families and what other things are happening for kids in and around the church. And then to be able to kind of cast vision for the next year is probably a really smart move, because you don't want to get in and be like, oh, well, this was planned. Well, we're not going to do it. Like, we're going to do something else.
For sure. Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and I'm really blessed right now with the staff and with a kids ministry that's ready. They're ready for whatever is coming next. I mean, that's why they hired a kids director, and so it is a blessing when you're in that kind of space too, where I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna have to step on too many toes to kind of
Yeah.
get some things rolling. I think people are itching for it.
Yeah. That's always fun when a new person comes in and you're like, oh, I'm so excited. What are you going to do? What do you have to offer? Like, what ideas are you going to bring? And so that's always fun because I know that oftentimes that's not the environment and that's
Yeah.
not kind of the situation. You're kind of coming in and you're kind of
Mhm.
walking uphill a little bit, but it's fun to have the backing and the support of the fellow staff.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought of another question that I'm going to ask you. And when you're looking for, and this is kind of more general, but like as you were trying to figure out, okay, what do I am looking for a new job, you're trying to move back to Idaho, you're kind of exploring your options, and maybe someone who is in that same spot. They're like, I've really loved my church, but we're kind of trying to figure out what's next, or maybe we're trying to move to somewhere different. What are some things that you look for in maybe a job description or a church website, and maybe what are the one or two things that you look for in the interview process, kind of like from your, maybe give some encouragement to maybe those who are looking for a job or in the interview process for jobs.
Yeah, so I'd say some of I've been in situations in the past where I've not been afforded the ability to be picky
Totally.
as
Yep.
much, you know. I mean, you obviously never want to go into a place and just have your standards so high that no church is going to mark up.
Yeah.
It's going to be up on that level. It's kind of the idea, if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll mess it up. Similar kind of idea there.
Yep.
I would say I think it's good to kind of get a pulse on the culture of the church, and does that culture of the church line up with where you are as a family. That's a big piece of that as well. I grew up in a church that was giant Southern Baptist church, very, very, very conservative. And I just know for my family and for where we are right now, that wouldn't work. And so understanding culture and what things are important to us is huge. And so,
Yeah.
we're looking at Stonehill, and I'm thinking, obviously you want to make sure like they're teaching God's word, and you want to make sure
Yeah.
that you align on doctrinal issues and all
Yep.
of those things. But outside of that, it's thinking about the questions that are going to lead to you being there long term and making that a successful fit. Like, how do they feel about families? What is their culture for an expectation for my family as a staff member? For my wife and I, we have opinions on that thing. I have opinions on that thing because it's important for our family. And so taking a look at things like that, I think it's all kind of a matter of what values you have, and then looking and seeing if the church has those. For me, coming in kids ministry, I'm very, I would much rather err on the side of going over the kids' heads as opposed to not giving them enough scripturally.
Right.
And so that's a big value for me. And hearing, I did my research into Stonehill. I mean, I went back and I was listening to sermons and all sorts of things. Luckily, I got pretty lucky, and they did a Next Gen series, beginning of the year. It's almost like they were looking for a kids director or something. So I got to hear a pretty good view. Into like just Next Gen and kids and youth philosophy. Those are I think some of the things I can think of. And then I would also say too, when looking for a church, I think you also need to take a look at the area of the country or of another place that you're going to be. I think plays into
Totally.
it a lot. The church we were at before, we weren't super huge fans of the area, which was a struggle, and I think it turned out to be more of a struggle for our family than I would have thought it would be. Going in. And so I think it's important to look for that. I think we also need to be open. Wherever the Lord has us, He has us. But there's definitely something beautiful when the Lord just opens a door. For me, like I mentioned in the past, we've had some really strong ties here, and so seeing the Lord open up for that, I think it's kind of cherry on the top.
Yeah. How sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question we always ask is, if you were going to talk to someone brand new in kids ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I was just talking to somebody here in town that's like brand new to kids ministry. We just had this conversation, and I asked her, "What is your biggest struggle?" And she said, "Managing people is her biggest struggle." And I said, "Well, welcome to kids ministry."
You're like, same.
Yeah, I'm like, everyone in kids ministry has the same thing. So I'll say, really, what I said to her is, go out of your way to have intentional conversations with those people. If there are folks that there's tension with, pray for them, and then have conversations with them and seek those people out. And so that would be my advice, is just, seek out those conversations with people, ask the Lord what's going on, ask the Lord to help you in guiding your conversations with them, because the reality is that everyone has something going on underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And if we show intentionality and care, and we show people that we genuinely, especially volunteers and parents, we genuinely care for them and their spiritual health, the Lord can really open up those relationships. So that would be the advice I would give. That, and someone brand new in kids ministry, don't eat too many goldfish. It does feel like impossible, but don't eat too many goldfish. You will regret it.
I haven't heard somebody say that, but I'm like, yes. That is so true. Oh my goodness. That is hilarious. And like, I can't tell you how many times you'd be like sitting at your desk and there's like a giant box of goldfish.
Just a giant box.
And you're like, oh, this looks delicious.
And then you look and you're like, I've had goldfish for lunch about 6 days in a row now.
Or like, you're like so desperate, there's no more goldfish and you're so desperate and you go to the like plain Cheerios and you're like, these are disgusting.
Or the deepest depths of despair, you pull out a puff.
Oh, gross. That's disgusting. Oh, I hope nobody ever does that. You're like, I will pay for you to go and get lunch if you if you're eating a puff. You're like, at that point, when you've reached the lowest of the low, that it's time to step away from your desk and stop whatever you're working on and go get some food. Oh,
that's like a youth group game right there, eating puffs.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. No, thank you. I could never. Well, that's a great way to end. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today. If someone has more questions for you, if they're like, oh, I really want to ask James this question, or like, Lauren, you forgot to ask the most important question, where can they find you? How can leaders connect with you to just ask more? And maybe they're listening and they're local to your area and want to connect. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, if you're local to the area, you can call up our Stonehill offices and reach out to me, and I would love to go grab coffee or something like that. I'm all about getting the chance to talk to people locally. It's a blast to be able to do that. I would say online, if we're doing that, you can always send me an email, james@stonehill.church, or any of the socials. It's just J is for James, and I always get made fun of for it, but J is for James on all the socials. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to, set up a call or whatever I can do to help. I think we all are continually growing, and so if I can help someone else to grow, I'm happy to do that. And then you can probably teach me a thing or two as well. So
great. That's awesome. Wasn't that just the best conversation with James? I definitely loved his answer to the last question about eating all the goldfish. We've all been there. We've all had goldfish for lunch. And let me just say, no more. I hope you enjoyed the wisdom that James had to offer about transitioning jobs, leaving well, and jumping into a brand new role. Not only with you as a leader, but also bringing your family alongside you. Because we all know that ministry is not just you by yourself. Your family is also signing on together. And so I thought that was such a sweet conversation with James, and how he was honest and shared with us about his family making this transition. I hope that you maybe got some things to implement into your ministry life as you're discerning through transitions, or maybe you're brand new in a role and what it looks like to just sit and listen and soak it all in with the people around you and continue to love and serve right where you are at. If you would like to connect with James or learn more about what he's doing at his church, jump down to the show notes. All the things are there, from his social pages to the church's website and all the things that you need to know. As always, if you want to keep this conversation going, you can head over to Kids Ministry Circle on Instagram and Facebook, called @Kids Ministry Circle. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.